On the surface, they can look surprisingly similar. You've got two systems, both built around community, both talking about shared resources. But when you really dig into the Order of Enoch and Marxian communism, you find out they aren't just a little different, they're described as total polar opposites. So, what's actually going on here? Let's break it all down.
So, this is the big question, right? It's the one that trips a lot of people up. We see a community sharing things, and our brain just kind of jumps to the word communism. But is that label really accurate for something like the Order of Enoch? Well, the argument we're exploring today says it's not just inaccurate, it's the complete opposite of the truth. So here's our game plan for getting to the bottom of this. First, we're going to tackle why people get them confused. Then we'll put them head-to-head, point by point. We'll dig into a key biblical passage that's often misunderstood, look at a really telling story, and then finally wrap it up by comparing their core philosophies on human nature itself. All right, let's dive right in. Why do these two systems get so mixed up in the first place? I mean, when you hear phrases like the common good or sharing resources, it's pretty easy to see how those lines could get a little blurry. But it's the core ideas, the philosophies behind them, that actually set them on completely different paths. And this right here, this gets to the very heart of the argument. The difference isn't supposed to be subtle, it's a polar opposition. This whole idea of them being worlds apart is what we're going to unpack. Let's look at exactly why that distinction is made so strongly. Okay, so this is where we get into the real nuts and bolts of it all. We are going to put these two systems side by side and look at some of their most defining principles. This direct comparison is honestly the clearest way to see the massive divides between them. Okay, so this table lays it all out, and the contrasts are, well, they're pretty stark. Now, we're not going to read every single line, but let's zero in on three of the most fundamental differences that really create this huge chasm between them. We're going to start with the biggest one of all, property. This right here, this is the first major split. In the Order of Enoch, property is privately owned. It's held in what's called a stewardship. You manage it, it's yours. But under Marxian communism, the state owns everything. All property is operated by the state, controlled by the state. That is a foundational difference you just can't get around. And this idea of ownership flows right into the next big point, choice. In the Order of Enoch, we're told participation is completely voluntary. You can leave whenever you want and take your property with you. Now, contrast that with a communist state where participation is forced. Trying to leave could bring on the most severe penalties. It's literally the difference between free will and coercion. And wow, this illustrates another incredibly deep ideological divide. The Order of Enoch is built around the family. It's the core social unit. But the Communist Manifesto, it explicitly calls for the abolition of the family because it sees it as just a construct of the middle class that needs to be dismantled. I mean, you really couldn't have two more opposite views on something so fundamental. So, if these systems are so different, where in the world does all this confusion come from? Well, a lot of it comes from a pretty common interpretation, or, as we're about to see, a misinterpretation of how the early Christians handled their money and property. Let's dig into that. And here it is, this verse from the book of Acts. This is basically Exhibit A for anyone making the early Christians were communists argument. Had all things common. I mean, on the surface, you can totally see why someone would make that connection. But we're being urged to look a little deeper at the context here. And here's the counter-argument. This passage wasn't describing a legal system of state-owned property at all. Instead, it was describing an attitude, a spirit of brotherhood and generosity, where people voluntarily looked after one another. They still legally owned their stuff, they just chose not to be possessive about it. Now, to really back this interpretation up, we can look at a pretty dramatic story just a few chapters later in Acts. This story, the case of Ananias and Sapphira, is actually presented as the definitive proof that private property and voluntary giving were the real principles at play. So here's what happens. This couple, Ananias and Sapphira, they sell some land. They decide to donate the money, but, and this is the key part, they secretly hold back a portion for themselves while pretending they're giving the full amount. When they show up to make their donation, the Apostle Peter confronts them about the lie. And this is the pivotal moment in the whole story. Peter doesn't get angry at them for keeping some of the money. He's angry because they lied. His question says it all. Hey, wasn't the land yours to begin with? And after you sold it, wasn't the money yours to control? The implication is crystal clear. This was a system built on private ownership and personal choice.
So, what this story shows us is a system of voluntary contribution. The property was theirs, the money was theirs. Their sin wasn't an economic one, it was a moral one. They lied to God and the community. So, the argument is that this whole system was based on private ownership and free will offerings, which is the exact opposite of forced collectivization. So, this brings us to our final section, where we really move beyond just the economic models and into the deep philosophical differences. What these two systems believe about human nature, about motivation, and about the role of the individual versus the state. Well, the big critique of forced communal ownership is that it works against our basic human nature. The argument goes that this kind of system just crushes the very things that drive us as people: our initiative, our freedom to choose, our creativity, our sense of personal dignity. And in the end, everything and everyone just becomes second to this abstract idea of the state. But in direct contrast, the Order of Enoch was apparently designed to work with human nature, not against it. The whole goal was to encourage that initiative, to foster a sense of pride through ownership and stewardship, and to frame your work not as a duty to the state, but as a kind of partnership with God. So, what's the real divide here? I mean, after we peel back all these layers, it seems like the core difference isn't really just about economics, is it? It's about where the ultimate authority comes from. Is it a top-down state that gives you your rights and demands your loyalty? Or is it a system built on individual freedom, personal stewardship, and a moral code that comes from faith? That question, that goes right to the heart of how we think about organizing society.